intubation. So I've been around EMS, as Dave said, when the Lord said, "Let there be light," it shined on your bald head. So that's how long I've been in EMS, 51 years. After a career in trauma surgery and Vietnam War, et cetera, I moved to EMS. Now, so when I started in 1974, some group of physicians and engineers brought an idea to me that seemed kind of crazy. That was called an automated device for external defibrillation. And nobody would touch it down in the organ area where they were, and we did touch it, and it eventually became the AED. Subsequently, some of the other craziness has been, oh, everybody needs end-tidal CO2 on their tube, was kind of a concept. And at the time, most people were going, oh, no, 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 we don't need that. We know the tube went through the hole. And then there were the concepts of the video laryngoscopy, see it and record it. Another concept. And then Dave and his colleagues came to me with this cockamamie idea for a device that would be a supraglottic airway and then become an intraglottic airway. And the first version was 3D printed. And I went, I don't know about this. Incredible skepticism. I said, you got to prove me that this thing could conceivably work. And they indeed did that. That's the amazing part. So they evolved and we evolved and subsequently went down to Scotty's lab in San Antonio. We took a group of EMTs with 5 minutes of education, truly 5 minutes of education, and a group of paramedics with an equal education. We took them into the cadaver lab. We had them use the device on fresh frozen cadavers that were, of course, thawed, and that I had previously examined each of and recorded what the actual airway looked like using the UE scope. So we had a recording and then we had a performance. And after it was put in, we used an ambush scope to verify what its location was. So with that, we were honored to have the paper published in Science on September 10th, because this is really a scientific component. And I'm going to turn the program over to Dave Haggerty. Now, Dave is a real doctor. It was a concept my grandmother had a hard time. Is he a dentist doctor, a doctor? And I would say, no, grandma, he's a PhD. And she, an optician? So that was best she could do from the old country. But in any case, Dave, the show is yours.
Thank you, Marv. Appreciate the introduction. It's been, great working together and proving you wrong the last few years. So yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is David Haggerty. I'm a fake doctor. You all are the real doctors. And our work at Vine Medical, starting at UCSB where I did my PhD in sense, is to try to bring some autonomy or some augmentation to intubation. And so, kind of the core team is myself, my PhD advisor from UCSB, Dr. Elliot Hawks, and we've been collaborating with, this kind of started out with a tight collaboration with an anesthesiologist from Stanford, Dr. David Drover, and then we added Dr. Jose Zavallos out of UPMC as the kind of airway anatomy expert to help us, make sure that we're building the right thing for the breadth of anatomy. So, our kind of, first insight is that intubation is this artisanal skill that hasn't fundamentally changed in basically a century. And for a variety of reasons, we believe that there's a better technological approach to airway management that can, reduce skill, reduce failure, reduce time, and reduce trauma. And thereby, taking all that stuff off the table, conceivably improve survivability in cases of airway emergency. So before we bury the lead, this is, kind of an excerpt of the study that we ran where we had, a paramedic using the video laryngoscope that he uses every day in the cadaver lab, really struggling. And I'll show you in a couple minutes what our device did in contrast. And this really is the problem that we hope we can solve. So here's a kind of excerpt of screen grab of our paper. You can find it in Science Translational Medicine, titled "A Soft Robotic Medical Device or Soft Robotic Device for Rapid and Self-Guided Intubation." A couple folks from my team, hopefully a couple names that you all recognize. Obviously Marv Wayne, Dr. Winkler, and Dr. Wampler out of San Antonio, Dr. Jarvis, and like I said, some of those other folks from our team. So, this key premise that we had was that growth can enable this kind of highly reliable soft robotic growth, which is what I did my PhD in, can enable this kind of highly reliable near zero skill intubation. And we do that with this kind of introducer that's the supraglottic airway type component. It's pretty similar to an intubating LMA in intent, but much different in geometry. And it has this ETT with a self-guided tube, the soft robotic overtube affixed to it. And when you basically drop the supraglottic airway in and then advance the ETT, the self-guided tube kind of does this weird, you know, controlled growth from the pharyngeal axis up over the arytenoids into the laryngeal axis. And kind of the secret sauce here, as it were, is like I said, we have this ETT. It's connected to this overtube. This overtube has certain geometry kind of programmed into the wall, which I'll show you in a second. And as you push the ETT, there's no relative motion with this, these red dots and this gray line with respect to the environment. So there's no friction. It's led by this kind of soft inflated thing. And then only at the very end does the ETT emerge. And like I said before, we kind of program in the general geometry of the airway so that, we can kind of jog from a straight line, which is how a normal ETT push from the base would want to go, and we can at the point of growth at the tip change geometry to go up and over the arytenoids, as it were, into the trachea. And importantly, when there's what's really nice about growth is when you kind of miss the mark a little bit, it pretty gently and kind of quote unquote passively intelligently finds its way to the path of least resistance. And so, our goal in this paper was to evaluate this technology in a controlled setting to basically assess feasibility. So we did some bench testing to kind of evaluate the fundamental behavior of the components. We did, kind of some expert simulation just to see, when I say expert, I mean people that have used the device a whole bunch of times. Like, how does this work in a mannequin and a cadaver? And then we took it to the cadaver lab, as Marv said, with four medics, four EMTs. We gave them, the same training, 3-minute video, one attempt in a cadaver, and then we put them up against the VL that they use in their agency in San Antonio. We gave them VL training as well because we know these EMTs don't have any VL experience necessarily. And we tracked first pass success, overall success, and we'll get there in just a second. So, question one, does growth in fact reduce the force of intubation? So we kind of had this instrumented larynx. I can tell you about the exact experimental setup if you all are interested. But we aligned an ETT with this aperture and our excuse me growing device, and we just measured the force to grow through this or pass through this larynx. And kind of our this graph shows that our premise that growth really reduces force is pretty justified, because ultimately when you push, you kind of accumulate friction for every incremental distance that you traverse. Whereas with growth, there's no relative motion with the environment. So we significantly reduce the amount of force to pass through an arbitrary path, and this should be independent of substrate. So whether it's you know tissue or not shouldn't matter. The same premise holds. And then we tried to evaluate this kind of like robustness to misalignment. This idea that if we're misplaced, that growth can kind of find the path of least resistance. So we kind of swept in the coronal plane and to mimic somebody putting the device in wrong, and in the sagittal plane to try to mimic anterior airways. And we saw, not statistically significantly, but a qualitative potential improvement compared to a traditional ETT in the kind of, success region where you'd pass into that same model larynx. And then we took, a kind of into general supraglottic airway into the cadaver lab and said, if we use this as an intubating device for both our ETT and a traditional ETT, what's the success range if we're in the kind of superior offset, so we're not deep enough, or the inferior offset where we're too deep? And growth kind of proved out that in fact statistically significantly really expands the success region in the inferior and superior offset plane. So like I said, then we took it to we let experts try to intubate a lateral mannequin. We did this 50 times, 100% successful, basically measured how much time it took to, from start to finish. This is just with deploying the ETT into the trachea, no removal yet. We'll show that in just a second. But basically you drop it in, it naturally stops in the pharynx, just like a supraglottic would, and then you just push, and this growing body leads the ETT through the cords into the trachea. And this took on average with an expert about, 7.5 seconds. We did the same thing in the cadaver lab. So this time we included removal. So that's what the second bar graph is. So this introducer is designed to be removable. It's kind of like a hot dog bun. So there's no tube over tube. You just pull it out, separate, lift it out of the way. And again, we saw, about 6 seconds for an expert who knows how to use this device really well. 6 seconds or so to intubate, and about 2.5 seconds to remove. So all said and done, when you know how to use this device well, in a controlled environment at least, about 10 seconds to successfully intubate with 100% reliability. But I think where things really start to get interesting is in this kind of crossover randomized study that we ran with a group of paramedics and cadavers. Like we said previously, 8 cadavers, 8 users, 4 paramedics, 4 EMTs, up against VL, randomized all of the procedures. So each paramedic and each EMT got one training cadaver where they got to do both VL and our device. After watching a standardized training, they could ask questions of the proctors, but they couldn't, the proctors couldn't volunteer information. And then we gave each paramedic and each user 3 test cadavers where the sequence was randomized and the device was randomized and the allocation was randomized. And what we saw was, at least in aggregate airways, so all users, all airways, we saw, a numerical trend towards first pass success. We're just barely outside of the statistically significant p-value, but on time overall, we saw a very significant reduction in intubation time with only one really big outlier. In our testing, we found that there was a kind of subgroup of cadavers, about half of the cadavers were really challenging for both paramedics and EMTs alike. And so, this on the right, number B, take this with a little bit of a grain of salt because small sample size, kind of post hoc analysis. But what we did see when we did this subgroup of the, we'll call them the challenging airways, not necessarily difficult airways, was a very significant difference in the performance of our device compared to VL. And I'll show you that video in just a second. But it wasn't just that the EMTs were dragging the data down. The paramedics performed a little bit better than the EMTs as we would hope, but it wasn't significantly different, right? The same trend is present across both subgroups, which makes us think that there's something to the nature of this device that is in fact empowering lower skilled users to intubate more effectively. So, same paramedic as before, same cadaver as before. Our device, instead of taking 2 minutes, intubates in just a few seconds. So we'll watch that again. You drop the introducer in, it uses the anatomy just like a supraglottic airway to place itself. And when you push the ETT, that inflated over tube naturally navigates the airway with really high reliability. So, we'll talk about some next steps here. Well, quick conclusions. Growth definitely reduces intubation force and intubation time in this controlled setting. So, whoops, we did not have the data for all of these come through, but importantly, in the challenging airways, uh, the subgroup analysis that is post hoc and small sample and really just is a suggestion for future studies is that the different paradigm in which we manage airways or traverse the airway seems like it could have fill a pretty you know, filled this gap in difficult airway management where we had a pretty meaningful difference in outcomes. So, quickly, next steps, and we'll get to questions. This blind, we want to next develop and market the visualization enabled version, which you see an example of here with a emergency medicine physician testing out, because the blind device shows really great promise for this easy, highly reliable, low force intubation. And we believe that when we add visualization, we can achieve basically near zero failure, with the North Star ultimately being that we want to democratize airway management. Here we see a Navy corpsman, no experience with the device, telling us as she's doing this that she never thought that she could intubate. And with this technology, we hope to make airway management more of a product and less of a skill that people need to develop and maintain and live without in many instances where we'd rather have people capable of highly effectively managing airways. So with that, I will pause, open up for any questions, and happy to kind of step through any of these videos or plots again as people are curious.
I think my video is. I lost you guys. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Hey, David, hey,
There you
Peter,
are.
can you hear me?
Okay, I'm here. I'm here now. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
hi. You must have gremlins down there. Hey, so a couple of very quick comments. This all started again, as I said, kind of with skepticism on my part because I wanted them to prove me wrong and them right, which they did. There are a lot of places this may or may not go, but I want you to think about the future. We don't have enough physicians, assuming we have funds to even have rural access hospitals and urban and rural clinics with limited skilled people. We don't have enough people. We also don't have enough people that have enough intubation training to be able to really be good with this. I've got about 3,000 airway videos I've accumulated from our recording of our intubations. And among those are just a little bit of anything and everything from, meatballs to burns to standard. And nobody gets a tube placed with a degree of reliability in under 40, 50 seconds. And that is even on the good side. Most of the time, even the best of us who think we're super great at intubation will take more than a minute. And this device, one of the reasons I got excited about it is it's kind of like it is a brainer. You have to have the brain to understand that you need this device and you need to learn how to use it. But it does not take the repetitive training that a standard video or direct laryngoscope does. So I see this as a way of the future. And while most of the thoughts and discussion has been toward limited resource areas, I'm even wondering if on the crash cart, on the hospital, in the hospital, on the floor, where the patient needs an airway, and the ED doc or the anesthesiologist or who knows hasn't shown up yet, we use this instead. The future is what we make of it. I've been told I was wrong so many times that I wasn't as wrong as people thought. More important, I think the difference we make is a difference to our patients. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or discussion. Thank you, David, by the way. That was great.
Oh, thank you, Marvin. Thank you, Peter, and the broader Florida EMS uh, organization to invite me to present today. I appreciate it. Yeah, I see a couple I see one question in the chat, which is, what is the name of this device? We have a placeholder name, which is the Origin ETT. We came up with that kind of in about 20 minutes like 4 years ago when we had to submit to a pitch competition. And it's stuck because we haven't spent the time to rename it. So maybe it'll be the commercial name, maybe it'll be something upgraded by then. But our company's name is Vine Medical, and it's our Vine Medical intubation system is the kind of mouthful version of it. Yeah,
Awesome. I
happy.
got.
Go ahead, Peter.
I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm in a hotel room. Didn't get good service here, but I see that Dr. Kim Landry from the Panhandle. You have a question? Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, so the device itself does not record. It's not a recording device, correct? So you're using a separate videoscope as you're using this device for this particular study. Is that correct?
Yeah, so for this study, the way that we ran the analysis was only kind of like the external video, and then after the process was done, we stuck an ambu flexible bronchoscope through the ETT and confirmed proper placement by, visualizing the tracheal rings.
So in the 93% first pass success rate on the difficult airways, that was discovered after the tube was passed, and you would have been assessing breath sounds and assessing end tidal. Would that have been the time in a real situation that you would have discovered the tube was not in the correct place, that you would have to take corrective action? Or I know that did you use your videoscope and notice that you couldn't intubate on those difficult airways, and so readjust it and then got it in maybe on the second or so pass?
Yeah, so great question. I think I know what you're getting at. So yes, the premise with the blind device would be that confirmation would be done with lung sounds and end tidal CO2. But the failure mode, so there's the 7% of difficult airways that we didn't hit on first pass, right? So what is the failure mode? Do we just like, were we in the esophagus and we didn't know? Consistently, the device will not really deploy if it's in the wrong spot. So you get feedback from the device that you try to push the ET tube and you meet resistance. You meet resistance before you dive, really deep and fully deploy into the esophagus or something like that. And that signals you, okay, we're not going to get it. We need to reset. Um, and so that's the how we design the blind version. I think with the visualization enabled version, the goal is to say, we don't need to deal with physical tactile feedback in a crazy environment. You can use direct visualization and aim for I saw a question come through about soiled airways. You know, the our experience is we have some videos of putting this device in a cadaver that had basically, we'll say blood, but bloody secretions up to about their back molars filling their airway. And our device doesn't have any, the blind version doesn't have any uh kind of mitigating effects when it encounters these sorts of soiled airways. There's definitely, Marv has shown me a video of, he said meatballs and peanut butter sandwiches. Like there's certainly a type of soiled airway for which we're, if unidentified, we're not going to push through, like a peanut butter sandwich that's stuck in someone's trachea, or a meatball for that matter. But, small, generally fluid and, small particle content, that stuff doesn't affect the device's operation significantly or at all.
Just a comment, Peter, and the group. We're, as I think David alluded, we think there's this basic need for where our group of supraglottic airways are being used by EMTs. And then there's this greater need where we might be able to add a video component for lots of places, areas that have somewhat trained individuals who may not be that experienced in laryngoscopy, or as Rich Leviton would say, epiglotoscopy. So I think, again, I was a skeptic because I didn't like what I saw initially, but I became a believer after I saw what we could do and where the need is. I'm presenting some work on supraglottic airway overseas, by BLS providers, and they're very good, about 93%. But again, how good is the good? How good are we getting in title? How secure is the airway and lots of other things? Whereas something like this would allow us a greater security with the same degree of efficacy, around 93%, but getting us a more secure and definitive airway.
So Marvin, let me jump in. Again, I was absent for a couple of minutes, so I'm gonna have Tanner come in here as well. Um, so is there a plan? I guess before I get to that, I have a question on what is the robotic part of this thing? Like I'm wondering. It says, you keep calling it the word growth, which I wasn't understanding that either. The tube that you're pushing in, at least to me, seems a little flimsy. Is that a real ET tube? Is the other question. And then do you have plans for, I know that there are some SGAs that have a camera that they just wire in. I think UE does that. And then obviously suction, etc. Could you incorporate suction into this thing as well? So a couple of questions. If you can answer that, then we're going to go to Tanner.
Lot of great questions there. So the device is designed to have, multiple ports. So there's a gastric tube port. There's a kind of like laryngeal port, we'll say, that can accommodate suction or secondary visualization. The ET tube is a custom ET tube because it is flimsier, but it's coil reinforced, so it's very circumferentially stiff, but it's very flexible. And the reason for this is, when we get to this question of, what's robotic about it, this is a you know a common refrain for people that are members of the soft robotics community, where we define the robotic element of this as the inherent intelligence of the system that we can mechanically embody and create. So that's a big question that really separates this traditional robotic field from the soft robotic field, which it can, if you're really fascinated, we can dive into this in excruciating detail. But we use mechanical intelligence or physical intelligence to automate the process as opposed to computational intelligence. And the 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 kind of core value of that is that we're able to create this, passively intelligent system in a form factor that is, accessible, safe, and, comparatively cheap relative to these other, like if we wanted to make a robotic arm or something like that that did automatic intubation for you, that'd be a, $30,000 piece of equipment. We can do it for, $150, $100.
Right. Okay, so am I hearing then that the actual tubes are in other words, you're sticking with this form factor that we will be using these tubes if we use this device, and it's not going to have to be replaced after it's placed, right? Like this is the tube you would use, right?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a fully functional endotracheal tube as soon as it's placed. It has a cuff at the tip. That cuff, is exposed when growth is complete. And the,
And growth. Wait, growth. Explain the growth thing. Like it just said, it's growing out of the like when you say growth.
yeah. So one of the weird things about it, and I should have pulled the video to really show what
Yeah.
this looks like. When you push the ETT is connected, and let me just kind of share my screen again as so I can try to show this.
Now you see why I'm working with a real doctor, a PhD on this.
Okay, so let's get back here. So this is kind of the important figure right here, where we have this soft ETT, this custom ETT, and it's got this inflated, bag over it, we'll say, just to make it simple. And those have these connection points, and the bag, when you inflate it, actually is pulling. It's kind of stretching. So the ETT in here is actually in tension, even though you're pushing it, which is a kind of weird thing to recognize. And so, the previously we had like a sphygmomanometer bulb to pressurize to deploy the thing. That was kind of clunky, so we decided, what, we're just going to make this closed volume that you push the ETT, but the business end does everything for you down in the pharynx. And so even though you're pushing the ETT here, this whole inflated over tube pulls the ETT with it as it grows. And that jogs through the geometry of the airway as it grows. So we have the kind of like general geometry. It's spitting material out, but changing form and changing direction as it does so. And that's how we navigate the airway. And then if it, hits off on the, the false chords or, like meets an arytenoid, it can just naturally, softly conform and still find
Mm.
the path of least resistance into the trachea because, one of our insights is that if you're not doing laryngoscopy, the esophagus is actually the closed hole and the trachea is actually the open hole unless you're in full laryngospasm, but that's kind of on the edge of the spectrum. So our path of least resistance based on how we've set up the kind of energy landscape is into the trachea with very high reliability.
And does the person have to be paralyzed? Can you do an awake intubation with this?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, good question. We haven't tested that yet. I think that you know, I plan on being the first awake intubation with our device. So, give me
He's gonna
about
really trust me.
yeah, give me a couple months and I'll answer that. My hypothesis is yes for the fact that the force of navigating the airway is so much lower. Like I don't know if I you know as a I think it's very hard to quantify at what force you go into laryngospasm, but I will say that even if the chords respond and they're short of full laryngospasm and maybe even full laryngospasm, it's hard to say. The nice thing about growth, and I have a video of this somewhere, I should have pulled it together, is when you grow, you can pass through orifices that are smaller than your body by basically collapsing, passing through, and then opening up again. So even if the cords kind of, start to shut, we can push through that and almost like pneumatically jack them open while the ETT passes within it. But, that's all, conjecture and hypothetical. I don't have any data to show you that that's really going to work in live patients. But,
Okay.
let me get back to you.
Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate that. Great answer. Let me move to my co-host, Tanner Smita, a research guru here. So Tanner, you're seeing this new device. You see the paper publishing in the publication. What are your thoughts here? And then Gordon, I'm going to get to you after that.
Yeah, I just want to say I love this technology. When I saw the abstract that was presented at NEMSP and the poster, I thought this was just incredible. In the where our institution's in West Virginia, and so we have a lot of rural EMS systems.
Mm.
Even the systems that have access to video laryngoscopy, right? We're seeing very low intubation success rates, right? In the systems that measure them, right? We're struggling to be just above 50%, in some of the systems. There's plenty of data out there that shows that the median paramedic might be exposed to one or two intubations a year, right? And that is really not enough to maintain proficiency in the procedure. So I think this is an incredibly important piece of technology if we want endotracheal intubation to remain part of the EMS scope of practice moving forward, right? And so, to get it there, right, I would say that we're going to need some trials in the EMS setting, right? In the context of, right, these challenging airways and soiled airways, et cetera, that we encounter in the field to kind of replicate some of the laboratory data. I imagine that, it would be easiest to trial this, in the hospital with anesthesiologists. But probably also a little harder to see a difference, right? Because they already have very high first pass success and endotracheal intubation success. So I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about how are you planning to trial this in the future? Is there any emergency department or EMS implementation ongoing? If there's anyone on here with EMS systems who want to participate, is that an option? That sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, great question. I really appreciate the enthusiastic support. That's very heartening. It makes me, this is what gets me out of bed in the morning. So thank you for that, especially because it's early here on the West Coast. Um, so, we have to get the device through FDA first and foremost, and the nice thing about being basically an endotracheal tube at the end of the day is FDA has agreed that with a little bit of OR clinical data, we can be cleared with relatively quite similar indications for use as existing ETTs. So what that means for us is once we're cleared, you know, as, subject to no, legislatively limiting actions by, here in California, we have to get like, state approval to use the device in EMS. But short of that, we should be able to use it in any airway management setting that is currently uh, you know undertaken. So what that means is, we have plans we want to see, we want to show just how valuable this can be in the EMS setting. And we're working to craft what that study would look like. I think if folks here are interested in participating in that study or, piloting making sure that we can pilot it effectively with paramedics and then figuring out what the right clinical trial endpoints are and accessing the funding to do that, please do reach out. I'm happy to, ideally we'd have a, multi-agency, rural urban EMS study that really tries to get at this, broad applicability and improvement in patient outcomes.
Excellent. That's a great answer. Gordon Miller. So Gordon is from DeSoto Parish out there in Louisiana. He is also an airway guru. He's a guy you want on your airway if you ever had a problem. And so Gordon, you kind of asked the same question as Tanner, but I would love to hear your comments on this amazing device.
So I'll start off by saying like we're all novice at intubating.
Agreed.
And I don't think anybody out there would be like, oh, you'll have people who, for whatever reason, judge their skill base off of being able to intubate somebody. That was especially early on in my paramedic career. They based their success off this one skill. We do it so infrequently, there's no way we can get successful at this. And I take a lot of this knowledge from two nurses that I used to fly with that are now CRNAs, and just talking to them, asking their opinion. Hey, then versus now. You're talking about people who intubate hundreds of patients a month, thousands of year, and I look at how many patients I've intubated, and I will say, even in a 25-year career, I'm an amateur.
Mm-hmm.
And what's I think is interesting about this conversation is the worst airways I have had in 25 years. Both of them were during the last 6 months. They were both patients who bit their tongue, and it was, I'm sitting there with a scalpel, and another paramedic's intubating, and I'm like, hey, you got one more chance before I cut this person, put a crack in them. I think that there has to be faith put in this device, and I would tell anybody, especially in the flight community, they probably have no questions about jumping in an aircraft, going IFR in the clouds, and trusting a computer for their safety and their life. I think this technology is amazing. I would love to trial it in our rural area, especially with as little intubation we do. We have video, we have every device that you can think of to help with our success. But I think this is next level. I think this device has a lot of promise in it. I'm not going to go on the SGA versus intubation train right now because I think I am very partial to intubation versus SGA just from the amount of time that I've used the T1 and seen data far beyond what most people get from a BVM. I think intubation is absolutely a must-have with some of these patients. There's not any question behind that, especially difficult to ventilate patients. I would look forward to trialing this and would have no question about putting it on our trucks to trial it.
So
Wow.
if I
Thank you
might
so much.
kind of synthesize, I'm sorry.
I just want to say thank you so much, Gordon, and
Yeah.
very the like I said to Tanner, I mean this is you guys are helping me with my reason for being, and I just want to say this is something that I is really meaningful to me because part of the reason I'm doing airway management is because there's this kind of timing, and David Drover's on the call here. My a couple of years ago, right before we got started, my cousin got in a motorcycle accident and didn't make it. And but 2 months later, David Drover reached out to me and said, basically brought this problem to us, which in the pre-hospital setting, people really struggle with airway management. And if you don't manage the airway well, then your likelihood of survival when something bad happens plummets. And so this is a problem that's near and dear to my heart. I don't want, another family to wonder, if they have the information, whether or not, airway management was the cause of, their family members' untimely passing. And, the fact that all are, so enthusiastic and supportive of what we're doing is really super heartening. And I, just really grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that what unfortunately, I think a lot of agencies they go the path of least resistance and the path of least, you know, risk. Unfortunately, those patients sometimes need that risk. Um, Sometimes SGAs, I know agencies, that's their primary, that's the only thing, that option they have. And unfortunately, when that doesn't work, death is the only option. If you don't have surgical cracks on the table and you don't have some type of intubation, there's no hope for those patients.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
That's really a tragedy.
if I might just comment, now you know why I got enthused about this. Because when the AED was brought to me, it was insanity. When lots of things are brought, they seem insane. But when you think about them, they're brilliant. We got a way to go yet. So I'll be the first one to speak for David. We're looking for funding to go to the FDA, to develop more prototype, to develop more studies. The fact that any of you are interested in using it, I think is heartening for all the work David has done and our team has brought together. Um, and so I really appreciate, Peter, you letting us join you today. Um, and I'm going to make a prediction, just as I have a few other times. Give us the opportunity to fulfill David's promise and give us the opportunity to move along with the device. And that just might be where we go in the future.
Thank you, Marv. Uh, First of all, just have a few comments, and I do want David Drover to introduce himself here. But David, did you say that was your brother that passed?
It was my cousin.
Your
My cousin
cousin.
who was only 2 years younger than me. So we grew up together and we're very close.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that, and our condolences for that. And what you're doing here is it's really phenomenal. And his name will always remain a blessing because of what you're doing. Let me bring in David Drover. So David, I'm sorry I didn't introduce you. I didn't know that you were part of the team here, but now that you've been called out, I would love for you to say a couple of words and tell us who you are and how you belong to part of the team.
Sorry, snuck in there. Couldn't resist. Thanks for inviting me, David. So another David, just to confuse everyone, really confuses people on Zoom calls. So I'm David Drover. I'll say in this tumultuous international time, I'm Canadian by training. I did all my training in Canada. Decided I'd go to Stanford for 1 year of fellowship. Oh, pushing 31 years ago. Might wrap this fellowship up soon. But in the process, I teach the difficult airway course at Stanford. We teach all the residents and faculty as well, every technique on the planet, but we invite other people. So every year I teach paramedics, life flight, emergency room physicians, ICU. And what was obvious to me is that people were coming back after a year or 2 years, and as if I didn't teach them anything. And it's like you say, if you only do 1 or 2 intubations a year, and there's so many techniques, you can never develop the proficiency I have. I'm thousands and thousands of intubations, the hand-eye coordination. So it was like, we have to find a better solution. And you look at the statistics in the field, and it's not great. I mean, it's just like the thought that we could do better. So it was like really reaching out to the engineering team, which was David and Elliot, to actually find a solution for what we can do better.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate all that you do. And listen, if you're part of Stanford, there's probably some funding you could probably figure out how to get this product to market. I'm sure. And I know it's a difficult thing. Obviously, we're here at EMS World all week, and listen, there are products out here that have been trying to get to market for a long time, and we know it's a long process. Convincing folks to use it in the field is another long process. But I think to Tanner's point and to Gordon's point, and obviously I'm preaching to the choir here, but the sooner you can get it into the hands of EMS, even if it's getting having a larger cadaver study, and
We're
then
going.
ultimately getting it into the field. Right. I'm sure you guys have all that planned. So, anybody have any final comments before we give David Haggerty the last word? Anyone have any final comments? Okay. All right, excellent. So, David, we always give our guest speakers the last word. You've really impressed us today. This is a tough group. I will tell you that one of the things I love about this webinar is that we pretty much only talk about the future, and many things in this webinar have come true in the 4 years that we've been doing this, and I think this one will too. So, I'm going to give you the last word, and please take us away.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I don't have much else to say other than I'm very, thoroughly grateful for the opportunity to present to all of you. I know that that this, even though it's the Florida EMS webinar, I know that there's a national presence here, and you guys are on the front line. You guys see everything from rural West Virginia, and Peter, you're in urban Florida, right? So
Yep.
All your expertise is so, diverse and varied, and you see everything, and you guys are really on the front line of trying to protect life. And so, thank you so much for giving me the honor of being able to present our work to you. And I am exceedingly grateful for the words of support, and motivating me to continue to build this product and bring it to market. And I very much look forward to working with anyone that wants to trial the device, get it on their trucks, get it in the hands of their medics. Please reach out. Let's build a big coalition of the willing here, and try to make that future come true.
Great, great. Well said. Huge kudos and thank you to Marv Wayne for making this happen. Thank you everybody for joining us. This will be on YouTube, hopefully, maybe when I get back home from Indianapolis. Stay safe, everybody, and keep doing what you're doing. And we will see you next week on the Florida EMS webinar. Take care. Thanks, David. Thanks,
Thank you,
Marv.
everybody.
Thanks,
Take
Tanner.
care.
Appreciate
Bye.
you guys. Great time.